My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a financial compliance analyst in Portland, Oregon. My parents spent 14 months carefully planning every detail of my younger brother Ethan's destination wedding in Hawaii, even though they weren't the ones getting married. My mother kept every receipt inside a pale blue envelope that never left the kitchen counter. She tracked airline prices every Tuesday morning at exactly 8 a.m., convinced patients would save everyone money. My father quietly accepted overtime shifts at the hardware warehouse so they could afford thoughtful gifts without touching their retirement account. Then, at exactly 9:17 a.m. on a Wednesday, one notification erased everything they had prepared. Months later, that same blue envelope rested unopened beside a wooden beach bench under a fading Hawaiian sunset, and none of us understood how it had ended up there. What happened that week didn't begin with missing plane tickets. It began years earlier, inside habits so ordinary that nobody questioned them anymore. Looking back, I can finally see the pattern because I stopped pretending each incident stood alone. Families rarely collapse because of one dramatic decision. More often, they weaken from hundreds of tiny choices that teach everyone exactly where they belong. That was the lesson my brother's fiancée, Vanessa, understood almost immediately after joining our family. She never raised her voice. She never openly insulted anyone. Instead, she ranked people without announcing the list. She simply acted as though certain people deserved comfort while others should feel grateful merely to be included. Whenever anyone hesitated, she smiled politely and repeated the same sentence. Not everyone needs a front row seat. The first time she said it, everyone laughed because it sounded harmless. By the 10th time, it had quietly become permission. The pale blue envelope became my mother's symbol of hope. Every reservation confirmation, printed itinerary, hotel comparison, luggage checklist, and handwritten reminder disappeared neatly inside it. She smoothed its edges every evening after dinner before placing it back on the counter. She treated those papers with the same care other people reserved for family photographs. My father, Richard, was 66 then. Arthritis stiffened his hands enough that opening jars had become difficult, yet he still insisted on mowing every neighbor's lawn who happened to be traveling because, in his words, kindness stays alive only if somebody keeps practicing it. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He simply believed promises should weigh more than convenience. I admired that about him, although I rarely admitted it aloud. The uncomfortable truth is that I helped normalize what eventually happened. Whenever Vanessa overlooked my parents during holiday planning, I convinced myself she was stressed. When restaurant reservations somehow left them at the far end of the table, I blamed poor staffing. When family group photos mysteriously placed Ethan and Vanessa in the center while everyone else adjusted around them, I smiled because arguing felt exhausting. Every excuse made the next excuse easier. By the time Ethan proposed in Maui, nobody questioned why Vanessa immediately volunteered to coordinate every travel detail herself. She said destination weddings required consistency and organization. Everyone nodded. I nodded too. She created spreadsheets, color-coded schedules, shared folders, and group emails. She thanked everyone for trusting her. My parents complimented her organization repeatedly. Mom even joked that Vanessa should have become an event planner instead of a real estate agent. I remember replying to one family email on February 11th at 6:42 p.m., asking everyone to confirm flight information before prices increased. Vanessa answered 19 minutes later. I've got everything covered. She copied the entire family. 2 days later, I asked again during Sunday dinner while Ethan carved roast chicken. My cousin Melissa heard Vanessa answer without even looking up from her phone. I already said I've got everything covered. Nobody questioned it because there were witnesses, written messages, shared calendars, and polite assurances. My parents relaxed for the first time in weeks. Mom slid the pale blue envelope into the kitchen drawer instead of carrying it around the house. As she closed the drawer, she smiled at my father and said, "Maybe this is the first family vacation where I don't have to worry." He smiled back. Neither of them realized they had just placed their trust inside the wrong hands. Wednesday, April 24th, began like every other workday. I arrived at my office at 8:15 a.m., balanced a paper cup of coffee beside my keyboard, and opened the compliance reports waiting in my inbox. At exactly 9:17 a.m., my phone vibrated twice. The first notification came from my mother. It contained only 7 words. "Claire, did Vanessa forget our tickets?" The second notification appeared before I could answer. Vanessa had posted a cheerful message in the family group chat. "Online check-in is complete. See everyone in Hawaii tomorrow." Below the message were screenshots of 6 boarding passes. Ethan, Vanessa, her parents, her younger sister, her uncle. My parents' names weren't there. I called Mom immediately. She answered on the second ring, trying far too hard to sound calm. "I think there's probably been a mistake." Behind her steady voice, I heard the kitchen drawer opening. She was pulling out the pale blue envelope, sliding page after page across the table. Reservation printouts, hotel confirmations, wedding schedule, gift receipt. Every document except the only one that actually mattered. "No boarding passes," she whispered. Dad never took the phone. Instead, I heard him quietly stacking the papers back into the envelope one sheet at a time, almost as if putting them away could somehow change reality. I called Vanessa next. She answered after 4 rings. "Oh," she said casually. I wondered when someone would notice. I honestly believed she was joking. "What do you mean?" She sighed as though I had interrupted something important. There were only so many premium seats left. Ethan and I decided to prioritize people who were more involved. Then she repeated the sentence that suddenly sounded much colder than it ever had before. "Not everyone needs a front row seat." I stared at my office window, unable to process what I had just heard. My parents paid for gifts. Dad worked overtime for this wedding. I know. They've been planning this for over a year. I know. So where are their tickets? They don't have any. Those 4 words landed with almost frightening simplicity. She explained that she had purchased everyone else's flights 2 weeks earlier using the travel fund relatives had transferred to her. She claimed airfare had increased afterward and there wasn't enough left for my parents. "But don't worry," she added. "They can always watch the live stream." I actually laughed because my brain refused to accept that someone could say those words without embarrassment. They're Ethan's parents. They'll understand. No, they wouldn't. Neither would I. That evening I drove straight to my parents' house. The pale blue envelope sat open on the dining room table beneath the wedding invitation. Mom had arranged every document into perfect little piles as though preparing evidence for a courtroom no one intended to visit. Dad was sanding a small Cowood picture frame he planned to give Ethan after the ceremony. Fine brown dust covered the newspaper beneath his hands. He didn't stop working when I walked inside. He only asked one question. "So, did she explain?" I nodded once. He looked down at the unfinished frame. "I suppose she had her reasons." Mom quietly folded one airline price comparison she'd printed 3 months earlier. "I checked those fares every Tuesday," she said softly. "They would have been affordable if we'd bought them ourselves." Nobody cried. That somehow hurt more. Mom simply reached over, placed every paper back inside the blue envelope, smoothed its corners with both hands, and tied the white string shut. Watching her do that triggered memories I had ignored for years. Christmas dinners where Vanessa somehow chose seating arrangements, placing her own parents beside Ethan while mine ended up at the children's table. Birthday dinners where my parents covered half the restaurant bill because they wouldn't mind. Family photographs where Dad was asked to step aside because someone taller looked better in the background. Weekend visits rearranged around Vanessa's schedule while my parents adjusted without complaint every single time. None of those moments had seemed catastrophic. Together they formed a map leading directly to this day. The worst realization wasn't that Vanessa had treated my parents this way. It was that the rest of us, including me, had quietly adapted around her behavior until it became normal. I had called it keeping the peace. What I was really protecting was her comfort. That night, I reached out to the first 2 people I believed would surely understand. My Aunt Linda listened patiently before saying, "Claire, it's their wedding. Destination weddings are stressful. Please don't make this into family drama." An hour later, my cousin Ben shrugged over the phone. "Ethan probably didn't even know. Just let it go until after the honeymoon." Both conversations left me feeling strangely embarrassed, as though expecting basic decency had become unreasonable. The third call changed everything. Melissa answered before I finished explaining. What? I repeated the story. There was a long silence. Finally, she said exactly 6 words that nobody else had been willing to say. Claire, this isn't normal. Stop excusing it. For the first time all day, someone gave me permission to believe what had actually happened instead of what everyone wished had happened. And once I accepted that truth, I realized pretending nothing was wrong would cost far more than any plane ticket ever could. Melissa's words stayed with me all night. This isn't normal. I repeated them during the 40-minute drive back to my apartment. I repeated them while staring at the ceiling at 2:14 a.m. I repeated them again the next morning as I looked at 3 different airline websites, wondering whether I should simply buy 2 last-minute tickets myself. The cheapest economy seats to Honolulu cost $2,846 each. Even if I emptied my savings account, there was no guarantee seats together were still available. I closed my laptop. For the first time, I stopped trying to solve the wrong problem. The issue wasn't the tickets anymore. It was the belief that my parents could always be moved aside because they would never complain. That belief had survived for years because everyone, including me, kept rewarding it. At exactly 10:03 a.m., I called Vanessa one final time. I'm not calling to argue, I said calmly. I'll cover Mom and Dad's hotel if you can still arrange flights. They don't need upgrades. They don't need special treatment. They just deserve to attend their son's wedding. There was a short silence. Then she laughed softly. Claire, you're making this emotional. It is emotional. No, she replied. You're making it emotional. I waited. She continued speaking in the same polite tone she always used when saying something cruel. If Richard and Diane suddenly appear, my parents will lose their oceanfront suite because room assignments have already been finalized. The seating chart has been printed. The welcome dinner reservations are complete. Everything has been designed a certain way. A certain way? Balanced. I knew exactly what she meant. Balanced meant her family occupied every important place. My parents simply didn't fit the picture she wanted. I'll pay any additional costs, I said again. You don't understand. No, I answered quietly. I finally do. Her voice became noticeably colder. If you keep pushing this, people are going to think you're trying to ruin Ethan's wedding. I've never wanted that. Then stop. She paused before delivering the real threat. If your parents stay home quietly, everyone will remember how gracious they were. Another pause. But if you keep making phone calls, don't expect invitations to future holidays, anniversaries, or birthdays. Families remember who creates problems. There it was. Not a compromise. A hostage negotiation. Acceptance in exchange for silence. Belonging in exchange for obedience. The old system had finally said the quiet part out loud. I thanked her for her time and ended the call. I never called again. Instead, I drove back to my parents' house. Dad was still working on the koa wood picture frame. Mom was ironing the dress she had planned to wear in Hawaii. Neither of them asked whether I'd changed Vanessa's mind. I think they already knew. I sat at the kitchen table beside the pale blue envelope. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, Dad looked at me. What happens now? For years, I would have answered that we should wait, forgive, avoid conflict, and hope things improved. Instead, I heard myself say something completely different. We stopped begging for seats at someone else's table. The sentence surprised even me. Mom folded the dress carefully before placing it back inside its garment bag. So, what do we do instead? We make our own memories this weekend. Not because we wanted revenge. Because we deserved better than waiting beside the phone for scraps of kindness. I suggested renting a beach house on the Oregon coast for 3 days. Nothing extravagant. Just the 4 of us. Fresh seafood. Long walks. Board games Dad always won. The picture frame. The unopened blue envelope. A weekend nobody could take away. Dad smiled for the first time in 2 days. I'd like that. Mom nodded. So would I. Before leaving, I told them something else. If Ethan changes his mind, there's still room. Mom looked surprised. After everything? Yes. The invitation stays open. Not because they've earned it. Because I don't want us becoming the kind of people who enjoy excluding others. Generosity doesn't stop being generosity just because someone rejects it. That afternoon, I opened my laptop to write a message to the family group chat. The first draft lasted exactly 18 seconds. Asterisk, congratulations on choosing appearances over your own parents. Asterisk. I deleted it. The second draft was even worse. Asterisk, enjoy explaining to your future children why grandma and grandpa watched your wedding through a phone screen. Asterisk. Delete. Neither message reflected the people my parents had spent my entire life teaching me to become. So I closed my eyes and started over. The version I finally sent at 3:41 p.m. contained only the truth. Asterisk, since mom and dad weren't provided transportation to Ethan's wedding, we'll be spending the weekend together here in Oregon. We sincerely hope the ceremony is beautiful, and our door remains open if anyone wishes things had unfolded differently. Safe travels to everyone. Asterisk. No accusations. No insults. No debate. Just facts. Less than 2 minutes later, Vanessa replied with a single sentence. Asterisk, do whatever makes you feel better. Asterisk. That was all. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement that Ethan's own parents had been left behind. 24 hours later, social media filled with photographs from Honolulu. Palm trees. Fresh flower lays. Champagne. Perfect sunsets. Meanwhile, 4 people stood outside a rented Cedar Beach house on the Oregon coast carrying grocery bags, folding chairs, and one pale blue envelope that my mother quietly placed on the mantel above the fireplace. It wasn't the weekend anyone had planned. But for the first time in years, nobody there had to earn the right to belong. The Oregon coast greeted us with gray skies instead of Hawaiian sunshine, but none of us complained. Dad grilled salmon on the small deck while Mom insisted the clam chowder from a tiny cafe in Newport was better than anything served at a luxury resort. Melissa drove down Saturday morning carrying homemade cinnamon rolls because, as she put it, family dinners shouldn't require airline tickets. The pale blue envelope remained on the fireplace mantel the entire weekend. Nobody opened it. It no longer represented the trip that had been taken away. It reminded us that love had never depended on a boarding pass. Late Saturday afternoon, Dad finally finished sanding the koa wood picture frame. He placed a family photograph inside it, not one from Ethan's engagement party or a formal holiday gathering, but an old picture from 15 years earlier. We were standing beside a lake wearing mismatched rain jackets, laughing because our picnic had been ruined by a sudden storm. We looked happier here, he said quietly. He was right. On Sunday evening, my college friend Rachel called from Honolulu. She had attended the wedding because her husband worked with Ethan. I wasn't sure whether to tell you this, she began carefully, but people noticed. Noticed what? Your parents. She explained that several guests assumed Richard and Diane had become sick because everyone expected them to be there. Others whispered that perhaps they had missed their flight. When the truth slowly circulated, conversations became uncomfortable. Apparently, even strangers understood something members of our own family had tried to ignore. Rachel also told me something that stayed with me forever. The reception looked beautiful, she said, but it felt strangely empty. According to her, Vanessa spent much of the evening posing for photographs while Ethan quietly answered the same question over and over. Where are your parents? No elegant centerpiece could hide 2 empty chairs. No ocean view could explain their absence. Back in Oregon, Dad hung the finished picture frame inside the beach house before we packed the car. The owner later mailed it back after learning what the weekend had meant to us. It still hangs in my parents' hallway today. When Monday arrived, life didn't magically improve. I returned to spreadsheets and compliance reports. Mom returned to her volunteer shift at the community library. Dad returned to the hardware warehouse. The victory, if anyone wanted to call it that, felt strangely heavy. We hadn't attended Ethan's wedding. That loss couldn't be rewritten. Some memories simply never happen. About 2 weeks later, Aunt Linda visited my parents. She surprised me by saying something I hadn't expected. You know, she admitted, Vanessa grew up believing appearances solved everything. Her parents measured success by what other people saw. She probably doesn't even realize how much she's repeating. It explains something. It excused nothing. Pain passed from one generation to another doesn't become kindness simply because it has history. Dad listened quietly before saying, understanding someone isn't the same as agreeing with them. That sentence stayed with me. 3 months passed before Ethan appeared at my apartment without calling first. I saw his truck at exactly 6:28 p.m. when I returned from work. He looked exhausted. Not dramatic. Just tired in the way people become after defending the indefensible for too long. I invited him inside, but continued putting away groceries before sitting down. For the first time in years, I controlled the pace. He could wait. After several silent minutes, he finally spoke. I should have checked the tickets myself. I nodded. Yes. I kept believing Vanessa had everything handled. I know. He tried another familiar approach. You have to understand how stressful weddings are. I smiled sadly. I do understand. Stress explains forgetting flowers. It doesn't explain forgetting parents. He lowered his eyes. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Do you think Mom and Dad will ever forgive me? There was no anger left in his voice. Only fear. I answered carefully. This isn't about whether I forgive you. He looked confused. If you want this family back, stop asking me. Ask the 2 people who packed away that blue envelope without saying a cruel word about you. That was my only condition. Not for me. For them. The following Saturday, Ethan drove to my parents' house alone. I stayed away. Later that evening, Mom called. She didn't tell me exactly what had been said. She only told me they spent nearly 3 hours together at the kitchen table. At one point, Dad handed Ethan the pale blue envelope. At another, Ethan cried. The rest of the conversation belongs to them. Some moments become smaller when repeated. Others deserve privacy because they finally became honest. A year later, our family looked different. Not perfect. Different. We no longer waited for one person to organize every holiday. Instead, the first Sunday of every month became open table dinner. Whoever wanted to host simply volunteered. Everyone brought one dish. No reserved seats. No rankings. No invisible scorecards. Vanessa came too. The first few dinners were understandably awkward. Then one evening she arrived carrying an apple pie she had baked herself. Instead of placing it beside Ethan, she walked directly to my mother. I made this for you, she said quietly. Nothing dramatic followed. No speeches. No instant redemption. Just one small gesture offered without expecting applause. Mom smiled and accepted it. Months later, Ethan surprised my parents with 2 airline tickets. Not for a wedding. For their 39th anniversary. A week in Maui. The confirmation email arrived in Dad's inbox at exactly 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, the same morning Mom used to check airfare every week. This time she laughed before printing the tickets. The pale blue envelope carried them safely all the way to Hawaii. It finally completed the journey it had been waiting years to make. I've learned that families aren't measured by who receives the best seats or the nicest view. They're measured by who notices the empty chairs before the ceremony begins. In 9:17 a.m., 2 missing plane tickets revealed years of quiet favoritism. At 6:28 p.m., one honest visit began repairing it. And that pale blue envelope reminded all of us that love should never require permission to come along.